Picture the year 1936, a difficult time in America's history. The Great Depression was weighing heavily on families across the country, and that was certainly the case for Lawrence Odell, Ella Holly, and Ella Pauline Drake, who lived in Lubbock. They had 4 children, the youngest of whom they welcomed on September 7th, Charles Hardin Holly. That's Holly with an E, but it wouldn't stay that way for long. The boy would soon take on the endearing nickname Buddy, and a few years later, his professionally misspelled last name would appear on the record labels that ignited a music revolution. Growing up in that swirl of country, bluegrass, and gospel, Buddy gravitated to sounds all around him. Hank Williams, Jimmy Rogers, Bill Monroe, the Carter family, these were the early influencers long before the term influence became a buzzword. When he switched from piano lessons to a regular guitar, refusing a steel guitar in favor of the kind his brother owned, Buddy's new mission was to blend the twang and bounce of country with everything else he could soak up from late-night radio. He'd cram himself into a car with his pal Sonny Curtis to tune into the distant signals of stations that played raw blues and R&B after local broadcasts shut down. No doubt that hush of late-night static, broken by driving rhythms and soulful melodies, shook something loose in Buddy's own musical makeup. He didn't know it yet, but he was fusing genres in a way that would help birth the future of rock and roll. Buddy was still a teenager when he decided on music as a full-time endeavor. By 1955, he'd graduated from Lubbock High School, and the world had just begun to notice a certain Elvis Presley. Elvis came to Lubbock for live appearances, and each performance blasted young Buddy with new inspiration. Right then, Buddy realized he no longer wanted to be a sideline act warming up crowds for another star. He wanted to stand out as a rock and roll innovator in his own right. His style pivoted from classic country to that irresistible brand of rockabilly that was starting to sweep America off its feet. But in one of those flukes of destiny, Decca Records, the label that wound up signing him, typed his surname incorrectly on the contract. Buddy Holly became Buddy Holly, and that single missing E would tag along in neon letters for the rest of his career. While this might seem like a trivial oversight, it would ultimately shape the brand, the stage persona, and the name we all remember. The sessions that followed, though, were not quite the triumphant start Buddy hoped for. He had minimal creative control under producer Owen Bradley in Nashville. Their arrangement forced him to use session musicians and adopt ideas he didn't favor. The early singles Blue Days, Black Nights, and Modern Don Juan sank without leaving so much as a ripple on the charts. Frustrated but stubbornly determined, Buddy pivoted yet again. He connected with Norman Petty, an innovative producer who had guided Buddy Knox and Jimmy Bowen to success. Suddenly, Buddy found a creative partner who recognized his potential, bringing in Jerry Allison on drums, Joe B. Malden on bass, and Nicky Sullivan on rhythm guitar. Buddy took the helm on lead guitar. A spark flew one day when the group, inspired by John Wayne's repeated line in the film The Searchers, cut a fresh demo of a track they'd first recorded in Nashville. That'll be the day. The phrase had come from Wayne's cowboy drawl in the movie, maybe an omen for these Texas boys looking for their big break. This time, there was no enforced wall of session pros. It was Buddy, free to arrange and experiment in Petty's Clovis, New Mexico studio. And the result was electric. A simple sample landed in the hands of Brunswick Records, a Decca subsidiary. Though Buddy initially wasn't aware of that detail, a quick sleight of hand allowed them to credit That'll Be the Day to the Crickets, circumventing Buddy's existing Decca contract. It worked. Released in July 1957, the single soared to number 1 in the U.S. and the U.K. The Crickets' rocket had taken off. The synergy of Buddy's stuttering vocal style, those signature hiccups, and the rhythmic drive of the band soon resonated with America's youth. Here was a young man who wrote his own songs, who made the electric guitar sing, and who had a look that set him apart from the greased pompadours of the day. The thick horn-rimmed glasses that so many teased him about soon became the coolest piece of fashion for teens across the country thanks to Buddy Holly. But the band wasn't always credited as Buddy Holly and the Crickets, and that was part of Norman Petty's cunning plan. Since Decca, under its various imprints, wasn't likely to promote multiple songs at once by the same artist, Petty simply toggled the credits. Some singles featured the Crickets, others Buddy Holly. It was all the same group, but disc jockeys and fans got the illusion of multiple rising stars. This marketing trick worked wonders in the 1950s. Rock and roll was still a relatively new phenomenon, and there wasn't a well-worn map for how to juggle distribution and publicity. Buddy, for his part, was so caught up in making music, he wasn't too concerned with label fine print. All he saw was that That'll Be the Day was a massive success, and soon Peggy Sue, Oh Boy, and Not Fade Away also hit the airwaves. Rocking the crowd at the Apollo Theater in Harlem, something that was quite rare for a white band at the time, proved their appeal was broad and barrier-breaking. From these heady first months, the story of Buddy Holly unfolds almost like a breathless sprint. Appearances on Dick Clark's American Bandstand and The Ed Sullivan Show made him a household name. By late 1957, when Peggy Sue hit number 3 on the charts, Buddy was unstoppable. If one needed further evidence, it arrived in the form of the Chirping Crickets album, which soared to an impressive number 5 in the UK. The distinct guitar riffs, the comfortable shuffle rhythms, the romantic lyrics that seemed tailor-made for teen listeners, these ingredients combined into a phenomenon that was building the cornerstone of what future generations would know as the standard rock band format of 2 guitars, bass, and drums. Yet while Buddy soared in popularity behind the scenes, he wrestled with heartbreak and tension. His high school sweetheart, Echo McGuire, had walked out on him. That proved heartbreak enough, but he also found himself juggling relationships and discovering that fame can complicate personal entanglements. In October 1957, the band recorded more material in a makeshift studio, an example of Buddy's relentless desire to lay new tracks whenever and however he could. Oh Boy quickly became another hit single, riding high on the charts. If these were simply the golden days of Buddy Holly, it might have been enough to cement him in the pantheon of rock legends, but that wasn't the entire story. As 1958 rolled around, Buddy found his sound and his confidence. The band was in demand. They joined huge tours that included gigs in Hawaii, Australia, and the UK. Their rigorous schedule was testament to the mania that Buddy Holly and the Crickets had ignited worldwide. No one was nailing that blend of country, R&B, and something wholly new, quite like Buddy. Then there was his personal life, rushing forward at breakneck speed right alongside his career. A chance visit to Pierce Southern's offices brought him face to face with a young record company receptionist named Maria Elena Santiago. According to legend, he asked her out on the spot, and on their first date, he proposed marriage. In August 1958, the two of them were wed. Norman Petty tried to dissuade Buddy from tying the knot, thinking it might ruin Buddy's appeal as a single baby-faced teen idol. But Buddy wouldn't be told otherwise. His life was in overdrive, star on the rise, newly married, always pushing the creative envelope. When Buddy and Maria Elena moved to New York, his ambition went into hyperdrive. He visited all the epicenters of music in the city, from the Blue Note to the Village Gate. He also started imagining grand collaborations, maybe a gospel-infused album with Mahalia Jackson, or an R&B blues fusion record with Ray Charles. He even registered for acting classes at Lee Strasberg's Actors Studio, wanting to expand beyond just music. In short, Buddy was hungry to explore every corner of creative life. He also began to grow suspicious of Petty's handling of his finances. Maria Elena's aunt Provi Garcia, who worked in music publishing, highlighted irregularities in how Norman was funneling the band's royalties. A confrontation seemed inevitable. That confrontation arrived just as fast as everything else in Buddy's life. The Crickets, content with Norman Petty at the managerial helm, decided to remain in Lubbock while Buddy left for New York. The split was amicable on the surface, but it changed everything. Buddy had effectively ended his partnership with his longtime producer-manager. Worse yet, earlier handshake deals had come back to haunt him. Manny Greenfield, a promoter who believed he deserved more than the 5% Buddy had agreed to, started legal proceedings. Under New York law, once that lawsuit was in motion, all of Buddy's royalties were frozen until the matter got resolved. The money was drying up, and Buddy, with his new wife, needed cash to support himself. The solution: one more tour, one more swirl of rock and roll excitement, a final dash across the frigid Midwest in the dead of winter. It was called the Winter Dance Party, and it would become the tragic exclamation point on Buddy's short but brilliant career. To fill out his band for this new tour, Buddy recruited Waylon Jennings on electric bass, Tommy Allsup on guitar, and Carl Bunch on drums. They set out in late January 1959 with the intention of zigzagging through small towns in the upper Midwest, places where fans were hungry for rock and roll. But the schedule was punishing, and the bus was ill-equipped for the brutal winter. After multiple breakdowns and sub-zero nights, Carl Bunch ended up in the hospital for frostbite, literally wearing socks made of ice after a bus breakdown. Buddy decided enough was enough. To speed things along and grab some precious rest, he booked a small charter plane out of Clear Lake, Iowa, to whisk him, Allsup, and Jennings to the next show in Moorhead, Minnesota, by way of Fargo, North Dakota. The night of February 2nd, 1959, after a high-energy show at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, that plane was waiting. J.P. the Big Bopper, Richardson, who was battling the flu, pleaded for a seat rather than enduring another freezing bus ride. Waylon gave up his spot to Richardson. Richie Valens, whose star was also on the rise, famously won a coin toss with Tommy Allsup for the last seat. They all headed to the small Mason City airport. The pilot was Roger Peterson, a young man not certified for instrument-only flight, especially on a night with falling snow and near-zero visibility. They took off shortly after 1 a.m. on February 3rd. Minutes later, the plane spiraled out of control and crashed in a lonely Iowa cornfield. Buddy Holly, Richie Valens, J.P. Richardson, and Roger Peterson all died instantly. Buddy was just 22 years old. The event shocked the world. In Lubbock, Buddy's mother heard the news on the radio and screamed before collapsing in grief. Maria Elena, 2 weeks pregnant, watched the first bulletins flicker on TV in a quiet state of disbelief, only to miscarry the next day. The shock, the heartbreak, and the sense of a luminous talent cut down in his prime became an instant part of rock and roll lore. Decades later, Don McLean would write American Pie, referencing the day the music died, cementing February 3rd, 1959, as one of the darkest days for early rock. The young man, with the unstoppable grin and signature glasses, had exited the stage forever. A funeral was held back in Lubbock, officiated by the same pastor who had performed Buddy and Maria Elena's wedding. Buddy was laid to rest with a simple headstone bearing the correct spelling of his name, Holly, and a carved Fender Stratocaster. But if you think that's the end of the tale, think again. The aftershocks of Buddy's life went on to transform popular music. In the months and years that followed, a cascade of new Buddy Holly records hit the market. Norman Petty, who still had access to many of Buddy's demo tapes, outtakes, and rehearsal sessions, overdubbed and edited them for release. These posthumous songs captured fans' imaginations, partly for their rawness and partly for their glimpses at how Buddy was evolving creatively. Two of the songs, Peggy Sue Got Married and Crying, Waiting, Hoping, demonstrated his knack for heartfelt, melodic pop that could also carry the rhythmic elements of rock and roll. People couldn't get enough of Buddy's voice, that lively hiccup still echoing through the new decade, even though the man himself was gone. Beyond the recordings, Buddy's influence was almost impossibly vast. The Beatles have repeatedly cited him as a direct inspiration. Their name was partially a nod to his band, the Crickets. John Lennon and Paul McCartney learned guitar chords from Buddy's records, studied his chord progressions, his harmonies, and even covered That'll Be the Day in their earliest recordings as the Quarrymen. The Rolling Stones were equally entranced. One of their early hits was a cover of Not Fade Away, a Buddy Holly track that Keith Richards dissected to develop his own guitar style. Bob Dylan, then just a teenager, stood in the audience 2 nights before Buddy's final flight and felt Buddy's gaze as he performed in Duluth. Dylan would later state that something about that moment followed him through his entire career. Eric Clapton, Bruce Springsteen, Elvis Costello, the pantheon of rock stars who tip their hats to Buddy Holly is a long one. The debt modern rock owes him is immense. So what was it about Buddy that left such an indelible mark? First, there's the music. He pioneered the now standard lineup of 2 guitars, bass and drums, a format so ubiquitous in rock bands it's easy to forget someone had to invent it. He wrote his own material at a time when that was by no means the norm. He championed double-tracking vocals and guitar, giving tracks a fuller, more modern sound. His stage presence was different too. He wasn't about swiveling hips or slicked hair. He presented himself in that Ivy League clothing with thick-framed glasses that initially looked dorky to some, but ultimately redefined cool. Buddy was both the boy next door and a boundary-pushing creative force. Of course, the legend of Buddy Holly also comes with the quiet heartbreak of wondering what if? What if the plane had never crashed? What if he'd lived to see the Beatles or to record with Ray Charles? We'll never know. But what remains is an astonishing body of work for a life that ended so early, and an equally astonishing influence on the shape of rock, pop, and even folk music. In 1986, he was posthumously inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in the institution's very first class alongside luminaries like Elvis Presley and Chuck Berry. The Songwriters Hall of Fame similarly honored him, affirming that his contributions as a composer shaped the trajectory of rock and roll. In Lubbock, a statue now stands in tribute. The city that once served as the cradle of Buddy's musical awakening proudly embraces him as a hometown hero. Streets bear his name, museums showcase his guitars and memorabilia, and the Buddy Holly Center stands as a testament to everything he accomplished in so few years. Tourists arrive to see the place where, decades earlier, Buddy as a kid clutched his guitar and dreamed of stardom. The surface of the statue still occasionally draws tears from longtime fans who can't help imagining Buddy singing Peggy Sue under the West Texas sun. Buddy's personal life, though overshadowed by tragedy, is equally compelling. He married Maria Elena Santiago after a famously swift courtship, but behind the romantic spontaneity was a swirl of tension, intense touring schedules, manager disputes, and a brand new marriage tested by the demands of a skyrocketing career. Maria Elena's miscarriage after Buddy's death underscores the heartbreak that wove itself into the story. She never visited his grave, in part blaming herself for not accompanying him on that final tour, convinced that if she had, the fateful flight might never have happened. It's a stark reminder that behind every rock icon was a family coping with the reality of loss. As time went on, Buddy's legacy started cropping up in pop culture in unexpected ways. In 1971, Don McLean's American Pie cemented the phrase, "the day the music died," and radio stations would trot out special tributes every February 3rd. Hollywood took its shot with 1978's The Buddy Holly Story, starring Gary Busey, which was both praised for Busey's performance and criticized for inaccuracies by those who knew Buddy best. Paul McCartney, whose own MPL Communications controlled much of Buddy's catalog, countered with a documentary called The Real Buddy Holly Story. Musicians from Marshall Crenshaw to Lyle Lovett to Weezer, who gave us a cheeky Buddy Holly homage in the mid-90s, kept the flame burning by referencing or covering his songs. The comedic cameo in Pulp Fiction, where Steve Buscemi appears as a Buddy Holly-themed waiter, further testifies to how Buddy's image remains a timeless pop icon. In the swirl of tributes, we find that Buddy's final show at the Surf Ballroom in Clear Lake, Iowa, turned into a kind of pilgrimage site. Fans from all over trek there, and to the crash site, a solemn marker of how ephemeral life can be, even when you're blazing brighter than a comet in the night sky. People leave behind flowers, notes, or guitar picks. The phrase, "not fade away," takes on new meaning in these tributes. The idea that Buddy's spirit lives on every time someone plays "That'll Be the Day" or "Peggy Sue" is more than a cliche. It's a truth that resonates with each generation discovering his music anew. For a performer whose career ended at 22, Buddy Holly's accomplishments fill volumes, and his posthumous influence keeps spiraling outward, an echo that never fully fades. Maybe that's the real takeaway. You can measure time in months or years, but the imprint of genuine artistry can be eternal. Buddy's life is a clarion call to seize every moment, to experiment fearlessly, and to merge your influences into something vibrant and new. If you do that with all your heart, your spark can light up the world, even if it's for a brief but unforgettable flash. So the next time you hear that unforgettable hiccup in a vintage recording, or see someone wearing thick black glasses with unwavering pride, remember Buddy Holly, the boy from Lubbock who took flight, literally and figuratively, and whose music and spirit remain forever etched into the soul of rock and roll. His journey from small-town stages to the corners of the world reminds us that genius can emerge from the most humble places, that heartbreak can drive us to transformation, and that the music, the really good music, never truly dies. Sure, there was a day it felt like it did, but all these years later, Buddy's voice continues to resonate, guiding new generations into the joyous frontier of rock, pop, and everything in between. And that, as John Wayne might say, will be the day